Sabbatai Zevi and the roots of Zionism. In the grand tapestry of esoteric history, where the threads of mysticism and human aspiration intertwine, we encounter the enigmatic figure of Sabbatai Zevi, a Sephardic Jew whose life reverberated with the cosmic pulse of messianic fervor. Born in the vibrant port of Smyrna, under the aegis of the Ottoman star, Zevi emerged as a mystic whose soul seemed to bear the weight of ancient prophecies. In 1648, amidst the turbulent currents of a world overcome by war and persecution, he declared himself the Messiah.
I am the Messiah!
Igniting a flame that would sweep through the Jewish diaspora like a celestial wind. By 1665, guided by the visionary Nathan of Gaza, his prophet and herald, Zevi's claim resounded across continents, stirring the hearts of the oppressed with dreams of redemption and a return to the sacred soil of Zion. Zevi's birth in 1626, on the solemn day of Tisha B'Av, the Jewish commemoration of mourning, bore the weight of cosmic portent. His very name, Sabbatai, resonates with the somber influence of Saturn, the celestial arbiter of law, death, and judgment. In the sacred sciences of mystical Judaism and the starry law of astrology, Saturn reigns over the Sabbath, embodying the austere and punitive archetype of the demiurge, the Chronos of ancient wisdom, who binds the soul within the prison of material existence. Zevi, marked by the celestial imprint of this stern deity, emerged as both a herald and a harbinger, a figure whose life and teachings would challenge the eternal dance between light and shadow, order and chaos, in the quest for the soul's redemption. Sabbatai Zevi's movement, known as Sabbatianism, was no mere historical episode, but a profound outpouring of the collective soul of a people yearning for divine restoration. His followers, from the ghettos of Europe to the bazaars of the Levant, saw in him the fulfillment of Kabbalistic promises, a restorer of the divine order, destined to lead Israel back to its spiritual homeland. This was an age when the Jewish spirit, bruised by exile and the horrors of pogroms, sought solace in the mysteries of the Zohar and the apocalyptic visions of Lurianic Kabbalah. Zevi drew profound inspiration from the luminous teachings of the revered Kabbalistic master, Rabbi Isaac Luria Ashkenazi, known in the sacred circles as the Ari, or the Lion of mystical renown. Through the radiant genius of Luria and the devoted labors of his disciples, the ancient wisdom of the Kabbalah was transmuted, assuming the noble and enduring form it bears in our present age. In Isaac Luria's profound and mystical teachings, the cosmos began with God creating 10 vessels to hold the divine light. This radiant light, too powerful for the vessels, shattered them, scattering holy sparks into the material world, where they became trapped. The enlightened ones are called to free these sparks through wisdom, virtue, and devotion, restoring them to their divine source and revealing the Creator's hidden glory. Zevi, with his charismatic presence and ascetic fervor, became the living emblem of these aspirations, a microcosm of the macrocosmic hope for cosmic renewal. But Zevi was a soul ensnared by the arcane depths of Kabbalah, Gnostic rites, and a mysticism that veered into perilous perversion. His actions, a tempest of scandal, shook the foundations of sacred tradition, drawing the ire of rabbis and monarchs alike. With audacious defiance, he cast aside the sanctified laws of kashrut, took to wife a woman of ill repute, and proclaimed a doctrine most heretical, that salvation, the soul's ultimate liberation, could be attained not through virtue, but through the deliberate embrace of sin. This doctrine, known as redemption through sin, stood as a radical inversion of the cosmic order. Zevi, in his fervor, declared that the Messiah's advent would not be heralded by righteousness, but would rise from the crucible of transgression and chaos. Since the path of sainthood eludes us all, he mused with a philosopher's gravity, let us then embrace the mantle of sinners. Such words, like sparks in a tinderbox, ignited the hearts of over 1 million souls, drawing them into the orbit of his revolutionary creed. In 1665, Zevi approached the hallowed doors of a Portuguese synagogue. Yet the guardians of that sacred precinct barred the entrance against him. Undaunted, Zevi broke down the door with an axe of divine conviction. Entering the sanctuary, he stood before the congregation, proclaiming with solemn authority that the bonds of ritual prayer were, in that moment, transcended by a higher dispensation. With words that resonated in the eternal chambers of the soul, he bade them utter the ineffable name, the tetragrammaton, that sacred vibration which unites the finite with the infinite. And then, in an act of mystic audacity, he lifted his voice, serenading a Torah scroll with the tender strains of an ancient Castilian love song. Yet the wheel of destiny turns with an inscrutable hand. In 1666, summoned before the Ottoman Sultan, Zevi faced a trial that would test the very essence of his mission. Offered the choice between martyrdom and apostasy, he donned the turban of Islam, taking the name Aziz Mehmed Effendi. This act, a thunderbolt to his followers, shattered the fragile edifice of their faith. Some saw it as a betrayal, others, steeped in the esoteric, perceived it as a mystical paradox, a descent into the kelipot, the shells of impurity, to redeem divine sparks from within. Zevi publicly accepted Islam, but secretly remained committed to his Kabbalistic faith. This was the birth of what is now called the crypto-Jew, outwardly Muslim or Christian, inwardly Sabbatean. The Dönmeh, his crypto-Jewish disciples, preserved this enigmatic legacy, also living outwardly as Muslims while nurturing the hidden flame of Jewish mysticism. Among his disciples were men of commerce and mystics of high station, who, under this clandestine fellowship, a brotherhood of paradox, wove their influence through the tapestry of the world's great faiths. To trace the influence of Sabbatai Zevi upon the modern edifice of Zionism is to walk a path veiled in symbol and subtlety, for the currents of spiritual history flow not in straight lines, but in spirals. Zionism, as it emerged in the 19th century, under the pragmatic hand of Theodor Herzl, was a movement of political and secular ambition, seeking a temporal homeland for a persecuted people. Yet beneath its rational veneer, it bore the echoes of an older, more mystical longing. A longing that Zevi's movement had amplified to a crescendo. In the esoteric sense, Sabbatianism was a great awakening of the Jewish soul, a collective initiation into the possibility of redemption through action. Zevi's vision, though cloaked in the garb of messianic drama, planted seeds of agency within the diaspora. His failure, far from extinguishing this impulse, redirected it. The disillusionment that followed his conversion fostered a skepticism of purely mystical solutions, urging Jewish thinkers toward a synthesis of spiritual hope and practical endeavor. Thus, Zionism, while outwardly divorced from the ecstatic visions of Sabbatianism, inherited its passion for the land of Israel as a symbol of divine promise fulfilled Moreover, the Dönmeh, those enigmatic heirs of Zevi's paradox, wove their subtle influence into the cultural fabric of the Ottoman world. Their presence, though shrouded in secrecy, may have softened the ground for early Zionist negotiations with Ottoman powers, serving as a hidden bridge between the mystical and the political. More profoundly, Sabbatianism's emphasis on the redemptive power of collective, the Zionist call for Aliyah, the ascent to the homeland, not as a passive awaiting of divine intervention, but as a conscious act of human destiny. The Sabbatean movement, rooted in the 17th century messianic claims of Sabbatai Zevi, persisted into the 18th century, evolving from a doctrine of redemption through sin. This arcane tenet, a paradox of spiritual alchemy, found fertile ground in the soul of Jacob Frank, born 50 years after Zevi's departure from this earthly plane. Frank emerged as a self-proclaimed Messiah and reincarnation of Zevi and the patriarch Jacob. He embraced a Gnostic-like theology, separating the Creator God from an evil deity who, in ancient days, revealed himself to the Israelites. Herein lies the echo of Gnosticism, a bridge to those ancient heresies that discerned a chasm between the divine source and the demiurgic tyrant of the material world. Frank advocated for purification through transgression of sin, leading to his excommunication by Jewish authorities. In the realm of philosophical and moral discourse, Frank distinguished himself through a radical departure from the eternal principles of virtue and divine law. He cast aside the sacred commandments that uphold the harmony of human society, proclaiming with fervent conviction that the path to a renewed social order lay solely in the utter annihilation of the existing civilization. In his doctrine, he audaciously asserted that acts of child sacrifice, rape, incest, and the consumption of blood were not merely permissible, but essential rights imbued with a perverse sanctity. Such declarations, far from illuminating the soul's ascent toward truth, plunged the spirit into the abyss of chaos, severing the sacred bond between humanity and the cosmic order. In 1786, Frank, facing financial ruin, relocated to Offenbach near Frankfurt, where his wealth mysteriously replenished. Frankfurt, a hub of occult and financial power, was home to Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati and the Rothschild banking empire. Speculation suggests Frank's wealth and influence were tied to Meyer Amschel Rothschild, forming a covert alliance with Weishaupt to advance esoteric and political aims through Frank's network of followers across Christian and Islamic spheres. This convergence of mysticism, finance, and conspiracy shaped subversive historical currents. The concept of creating a sovereign Jewish state emerged in the second half of the 19th century. It was articulated at the First Zionist Congress, which was held in Basel in 1897 under the leadership of Theodor Herzl. He was elected president of the World Zionist Organization. At this Congress, Herzl expressed and voiced the ideas of the global Jewish elite, which had governed its flock for many centuries. These Jewish elites, they were very concerned at that time about the sharp intensification of the process of Jewish assimilation in Europe. Many had long forgotten the traditions of Judaism, stopped going to synagogues, and begun marrying outside their bloodline. Herzl was tasked with articulating and implementing the idea of Zionism. First, the revival of the ancient nation of Israel, which existed during the times of King David and King Solomon. Second, the return of Jews from all corners of the world to this promised land. So, the Greater Israel Project was born, which was now even larger than the original kingdom of David and Solomon, and should stretch from the Nile to the Euphrates. By the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, this idea did not find sufficient support, either among Jews or non-Jews. Theodor Herzl was already willing to compromise on the creation of a national homeland for Jews, if not in Palestine, then at the very least somewhere else. And it seems that in 1903, the option for creating a Jewish state in Uganda began to emerge. Theodor Herzl accepted London's offer, but radical Zionists were categorically against it. Coincidentally or not, in 1904, Herzl passed away. After Herzl, Chaim Weizmann became the leader of Zionism. Undoubtedly, he made the main contribution to the creation of the State of Israel. An important event was his election as chairman at the 1920 Zionist Congress in London.
We stand at a pivotal moment, a time for vision and for action. The future of our people depends on the choices we make today.
He had major support from the Rothschilds, Schiffs, the Baruchs, and other wealthy Jews. And after the creation of the State of Israel, Chaim Weizmann became its first president. The orchestration of this rebirth drew upon the subtle arts of those masters of temporal alchemy, the bankers and financiers, epitomized by the Rothschilds and their allied adepts, who amassed the primal essences of capital, ignited the fires of bourgeois revolutions, and dissolved the archaic barriers to usury and fiscal dominion, thereby forging the invisible chains that bind societies in the modern age. The Balfour Declaration, issued in November 1917 by British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour, publicly proclaimed the goal of establishing a Jewish state in Palestine for the first time. Balfour, advised by Chaim Weizmann, addressed the letter to Lord Lionel Walter Rothschild, chairman of the British Zionist Federation. After the League of Nations designated that Palestine was under British mandate in 1922, the Rothschilds began to facilitate the immigration of Jews from various countries to the mandated territory. But the effectiveness of these efforts was extremely low. Between 1924 and 1929, 82,000 Jews came to Palestine, mainly as a result of the surge in anti-Jewish sentiment in Poland and Hungary. However, approximately 23,000 of this wave of immigrants subsequently left Palestine. By the end of the 1920s and the beginning of the 1930s, it became clear that it would not be possible to gather a critical mass of Jews in the Promised Land through appeals and some kind of financial support. The Zionists began preparing and carrying out another world war, intending to force the Jews to flee to the Promised Land. In this, the Rothschilds also made a significant contribution. In addition to the Rothschilds, Adolf Hitler and the NSDAP were financially supported by such influential Jewish industrialists as Fritz Mandl. The Führer received significant support from the Berlin bankers Oskar Wassermann of Deutsche Bank and Hans Previn, as well as the famous Warburg Banking Group and Max Warburg personally, who was director of the Hamburg bank Warburg & Co. After World War II, the creation of the State of Israel was almost complete. But world Zionism lacked the strength to reach the finish line at that time. It took another 3 years for the creation of the Jewish state to be finally announced in 1948. And since then, there has been almost continuous war in the Middle East. In the philosophy of the ancients, every movement of the soul toward truth leaves an indelible mark upon the ages. Sabbatai Zevi, a man both flawed and luminous, was a torchbearer in this eternal quest. His life, a microcosm of the struggle between the ideal and the real, reminded the Jewish people that the path to Zion is both a physical journey and a metaphysical ascent. While Zionism built its foundations upon the stones of political necessity, it was nourished by the subterranean waters of messianic hope that Zevi's movement had unleashed. Thus, the Jews see Sabbatai Zevi not merely as a historical figure, but as a symbol of the soul's yearning for reunion with the divine. His influence on Zionism lies not in direct causation, but in the subtle alchemy of ideas, where the dream of redemption, once kindled, can never be extinguished. In conclusion, Sabbatai Zevi's movement was a pivotal moment in Jewish history, igniting messianic fervor, but ending in disappointment. While it did not directly cause Zionism, it contributed to the cultural and psychological groundwork for later Jewish nationalist movements by highlighting the enduring desire for redemption and a homeland. Zionism, however, emerged as a modern, largely secular response to Jewish persecution, distinct from the mystical and religious framework of Sabbatianism.